G'day legends, I hope that you're having a fantastic day and so far that you're also having a fantastic week. Now if you notice in this video me sweating under these lights, well it is about 42 or 43 degrees C here where I live, what's about 108 for the American crowd out there, so it is boiling hot. But legends, nothing is going to stop us, not cancer, not the heat. So of course we always have a lot to go over. There are some significant shifts on the maps, both Ukrainian and Russian. We will look at that. And of course, we'll compare maps to see where things are going. And we'll zoom in on the maps. And, you know, there might be an advancement somewhere that is more important than something that may look like more on the map. Might be a road, might be a crossing of an obstacle. So we'll have a look over those maps. Of course, I have a miscellaneous folder. I want to talk about Ukraine trying to then attract more young people to join the armed forces. So we'll talk about that. We'll look at strikes, and I need to make a slight correction on a strike as well. We need to go over what, of course, President Donald Trump has said, wanting access to $500 billion worth of Ukrainian rare earths. Now, this was reported with an M instead of a B, because we even said 500 million when we're talking rare earths, we're talking mining. 500 million is basically pissing in the wind. That B, that makes more sense. So we'll go over this and we'll go over some misconceptions around this as well. So we'll talk about that. And then I want to talk about some comments that Mr. Tucker Carlson has made. He's made some comments about a lot of Ukrainian weapons ending up in the hands of cartels on the black market. Now, there's parts in this that I just want to add some perspective and maybe some reality to, but also talk a little bit at length about those cartels and what may be happening here and weapons going missing, because there is some misinformation, I believe, in this, although he seems 100% solid on that. So either way, we're going to eventually get an answer to this because, well, we know Trump has basically declared war on the cartels, but we'll leave that until the end. So firstly, let's go through my miscellaneous folder. Now, I put this on the Telegram only for a few minutes until I saw an update, and I just want to make a correction on this. So this is some of the footage that was shown. Now, what we can see here is a Russian UMPK. Of course, this is just the glide bomb kit, goes onto an existing dumb bomb that, of course, then can glide and can have some degree of correction as well. Now, we see this coming in, and it appears that it has airburst, and it definitely does explode above the ground. Now, that was what's being reported of, is this something new? Now, later on, we got some confirmation from Fighter Bomber about this, that no, this is a regular UMPK, a Fab 500, with a fuse set for instantaneous explosion, so when it hits anything. Most likely detonated upon contact with a tree or pole, so that has then in turn make it seem like an airburst. As far as I know, all UMPKs except those that use the RBC as a bomb have inertial fuses, that is contact fuses, and the same is true for the ODAB, another variant of that as well. So yep, just a slight correction on that, but I wouldn't be surprised if we do start to see more airburst, as fortified positions, airburst weapons can be very effective. We've seen a number of strikes overnight against oil and gas facilities, both Russian and Ukrainian, and you can just see that this is against Saratov oil refinery and in the vicinity of Engels Air Base as well. Now, what I will say is any of these strikes, we wait till we have some satellite imagery or clear imagery to say what the actual damage has been, but you can hear the sheer amount of fire and the searchlights here trying to hunt down these Ukrainian drones. Let me start this again. And we, of course, can see the Saratov refinery in the background. And then I have a second piece of footage here. And we can see in this area, you can see those searchlights as well, there are fires ongoing. As far as what level of damage there's been, we will wait out on this. Now, very, very rare footage, because if you release footage like this, well, someone whose probably protected identity is probably going to be kicking in your door and having a slight conversation. three-letter agency. Anyway, what we see here are 4 cruise missiles striking in Ukraine at the Poltava gas facility as well. And we get very clear footage of 4 cruise missiles. Now, we believe that these are most likely Caliber cruise missiles, and we believe that this took place after multiple Iskander and drone hits as well. But very clear footage here. The reason we show this is it is so rare to actually see this. Typically, we just get reports of most being downed, but we do know there is significant damage there too. But with everything, wait until we have further confirmation on this. Now, of course, we know Ukraine has a manpower crisis. A number one priority is getting people into the infantry. We're going to speak about this later from a Ukrainian former serviceman. But of course, what we know is Zelensky has not wanted to have a very unpopular mobilization, further conscription below 25. Although the law does not permit that between 18 and 25, the laws can definitely be changed. We saw it drop from 27 to 25. We do believe this is going to be a sticking point for the US as well. But according to Zelensky, the contract will provide 1 million hryvnia, just above 24,000 USD. And this is to try and attract more young people. We've been hearing about this for the last month or so, that we need to attract more young people into the ranks. But in my opinion, this money, along with free university and then a zero interest loan, I just don't think it's enough when you consider the earning potential for these young people in the EU as well. So I don't know how much success this will actually have. In my honest opinion, those that have been really motivated to join have already joined and will still trickle in, but I don't really see how much success this is going to have. What we do know is the Russians have had a hell of a lot of success on the other side with large amounts of money, somewhere in the vicinity of 3 million rubles. I believe that's about 30 to 40,000 USD. I'll put it on the screen here. But of course, are not going to have that same earning potential after the war into the EU. So I guess we will see. But of course, what we know is the conditions as well at the front. It's a very, very grim situation, whether you're in the Ukrainian armed forces or the Russian armed forces at the moment. This is a horrible, grinding war of attrition. And speaking of that war of attrition, let's have a look at the map. So, of course, we have Ukraine in the center of your screen, the capital of Kyiv. The red areas occupied since 22, the purple since 2014. Once we click this on, any red check you'll see on this map, this is ground occupied by the Russians over the past 24 hours. The blue is Ukrainian gains over the past 2 weeks, but we'll go back and forward to have a look at where that blue has moved. But what isn't being kept up is in Kursk. Now, what we know is this doesn't show on this map where the Russian forces were at one point. It only shows what it is currently. We know this is about 2/3 of what it was at its most extreme, at its largest. But between then today, we have 421.7 kilometre squares occupied. That's going to become more relevant. And then yesterday is 440. So 19 kilometre squares gained by the Russians in the past 24 hours around Sverdlikovo. Now, I don't believe this was the last 24 hours. I actually believe Suryak's map update yesterday or the day before, he said the Russians had pushed down this road and had entered Sverdlikovo. So I believe this is catching up on that. This map has a lot of catch-ups today. But large advancement in here. Of course, we've seen Ukraine have an advancement near Pokrovsk and as well in the vicinity of Ulanok as well. Those have seemed to stall out. We'll wait and see if more comes, but a much larger gain than those we see over this. Of course, this shrinking. But Kursk, there is a slight obsession with Kursk, I will say, and I think a lot of people in the just information space are just greatly overestimating the amount of sway that this actually has. I think this point in the war, if we were to have chapters in the war, I think the chapter that we are opening in 2025 is the chapter of seeing the reality. And there's going to be some very uncomfortable truths. There's going to be some hard realities that have to be faced. And they're going to have to be faced because, well, there's going to be some very hard decisions getting made. And we'll see how this goes. But if anyone's overestimating this, I think it is Zelensky. So The Guardian is reporting this. If Trump does manage to get Ukraine and Russia to the negotiating table, Zelensky said he planned to offer Russia a straight territory exchange, giving up land Kyiv has held in Russia's Kursk region since the launch of their surprise offensive 6 months ago. So saying we will swap one territory for another. He didn't say which part, but he says, I don't know, we will see. But all our territories are important. There is no priority. But we need to be realistic about this, that this is currently 421 kilometre squares. This is reducing just in the past 24 hours. You know, if we round up around 20 kilometre squares, it has reduced down 2/3. It's down to a third of what it once was. The Russians are occupying just over 112,000 kilometre squares of Ukraine. Now, I will say that this is going to be a straight exchange, but is it going to be an exchange at the rate that people think of, oh, we're going to get back Crimea for this? No, it is not. It's not going to be this. I think that there is a lot of information floating around Kursk to try and continue to justify this once we have other areas that are in desperate need. What do I realistically think will happen here? Well, I think it's going to be swapped back for at least a percentage or maybe all of Kharkiv. According to War Mapper's numbers, Kharkiv is 3% occupied by the Russian forces. Now, Kharkiv Oblast covers an area approximately of 31,500 square kilometres. We take 3.02% of this, 950 square kilometres. So even at over a 2 to 1 kilometre square ratio, that Kharkiv will be given back. Potentially. Maybe that's what we'll see. I think that is the most likely. Areas like Vovchansk in the direction of Lipsy. Of course, Vovchansk is completely just rubble to the point where you can't even geolocate things due to that. So, and of course, we have this part around Dovrichnia too. So it is a much larger area. It's over 2 times. But again, I think we'll just wait and see. But we have to be realistic about the amount of pool this is going to have. It's not going to have the pool of 100,000 square kilometres. So let's move our way back down the map. Let's actually start at Velyka Novosilka and move our way up maybe. So this is a very interesting update. Now, what you and I have been reporting based on other maps has showed that the Russians have moved up to the Nokryali, but this obstacle basically has stopped them here, and the occupation looks something like this. So the extension outside of Velyka Novosilka. Now, this map is showing a crossing of that Nokryali and further expansion outside of Velyka Novosilka. Now, to my knowledge, it still has not been confirmed the loss or occupation of Velyka Novosilka. We see further expansion out of this area. Let's then compare this map, and we can see, of course, this same movement in here, but showing a lot more movement to the northeast of Novaya Koma. See this paddock? This is right in here, as well as western side. Now, the best way is this road that runs on Novosilka. This is this blue dot, as well as this tree line or water in here. I think that is, I believe that's water, that this is coming up to control in through this area to the north of Rivnepil, which is this red dot. So you see this, a lot of advances in this southern area. Now, we move up, and the Island Boys, who became the Peninsula Boys, have now become the Beach Boys of Andriivka, that this is getting filled in here. Now, we have known for weeks this most likely looks like this. The Russians were at one point just a little part out here, but were continuing to actually expand out. And we said, well, if it is just this cut off little area, the ability to expand probably isn't there. I believe this is probably more like this, probably runs potentially up the Volcha like this at this point in time, but this is getting updated in here towards Andriivka. So let's compare a couple of maps here. Now, we have the first one here. I've written Deep State. I apologize. This is, of course, Syriac map here. Now, he is showing then advances in here. Now, but if we look at the extremes of the areas, both out this road in the direction of Oleksivkia and in the north, the extremes are fairly close. It's just this middle part that's not filled in. The Russian army took control over the northern fortifications of Andriivka and captured the central part in a series of positions. 80% is under Russian control. So we'll see. But of course, this is developing, if we move out here, into a very, very large pocket. What we don't have confirmation on is where the Russians are on the southern side of this pocket. At this point in time, if I can get this thing back, is if we go from here to, well, let's go to here, about a 10-kilometre deep pocket of a lot of open territory here. This is becoming and has been a very dangerous situation in this front. Let me call that person back. So we see, of course, this developing here, but we need to talk a little bit more at length about this. Of course, Deep State have actually written about this update. Enemy activity around Andrivka is increasing. The enemy's constant attempts to put pressure on the northwest between Persha-Trevnev and Andrivka have had their effect, as a result of which the Russians have increased their zone of control, in particular in Andrivka itself, and continue to absorb it. I know who that is, and it's not an important call. Currently, enemy infantry is recorded in various parts of the village, even on its western outskirts. But so far, for the Russians, this is a one-time action. They are successfully dying there. So the same as we hear again and again is that the Russians are just pouring in soldiers, and eventually that will lead to not being able to have any further advancements. The enemy's activity in Zelenivkia area is gradually increasing, in particular towards Ulaki, where the enemy have previously been accumulating forces. Potential advance south of Andrivkia opens up another direction to put pressure on the village, but it is too early to speak of any success on the part of the Russians in this area. So Zelenivkia, of course, this pocket that we have spoken about. But coming to what the maps have been showing us for a while on this front line. So let's move our way up Srebeni. We see more control here of the Zaporizhia, not the Oblast, the small town, as well as Srebeni. And then we come up to the Pokrovsk front. Now, we spoke about in the Pishani direction that we believed that there was some Ukrainian advancement in here. We reported on that yesterday, and we now see the maps confirming this today. Ukrainian push into Pishani. It's amazing that with this now, every one of these online bloggers, YouTubers is now showing maps. Interesting. But we see this push back in here. Of course, what we have spoken about is potentially to try and cut off the Russians, but also try and delay the Russians from taking Udashny and crossing into Dnipro Oblast. There are other maps showing that Russia has increased their control through Udashny. Of course, Pokrovsk is very, very important. If there are negotiations that are coming soon, to maintain Pokrovsk will be very important. So let's have a look at this right here. This is, of course, the Syriac maps, and he's showing this same advancement, very similar to the maps on Pashani, recaptured more positions, Pashani, south of Zerozove, and the Russian army made new advances inside the locality of Zaporizhia, of course, that town village we spoke of just down in this direction near Srebeni as well. Now, one of the most important updates, I believe, though, is actually on the eastern flank of Pokrovsk. What we know is there's a major road, a very important road that connects Pokrovsk through to Konstantinivka and down to Toretsk. This intersection here, now if this wasn't important, we wouldn't have seen Ukrainian demolitions team destroy the overpass here. We saw that a couple of weeks prior. And we see this today, and that the Russian forces have taken over and are controlling this intersection. This does cause logistical problems, and of course this is developing the eastern flank of the battle for Pokrovsk. Now, will there be a battle for Pokrovsk, or will it get enveloped and withdraw? Well, no one knows. No one has a crystal ball, but this H32 road, we can see these maps showing confirmation that that has then come under Russian control. Again, this is a push and pull style effort that is occurring on the front line. You push somewhere, there's going to need to be resources allocated, that there's going to be pulling somewhere else. Now, let's have a look at what Trump has said about this $500 billion rare earths exchange. Now, this is coming out that Trump demands $500 billion in rare earths from Ukraine for continued support. That has a price tag of $500 billion worth of riches. This is an interview with Fox News that Ukraine has a large, of course, amount of natural resources, and the US wants this as compensation for the hundreds of billions it has spent on helping Kyiv. Now, where I see a lot of people reporting this at this point, I believe incorrectly, but we may be corrected on that, is this is not new funding. This is compensation for the funding that has already gone. Many people saying this is a great exchange. It's $500 billion of weapons are about to be delivered. No, I believe this is trying to return money back for the few $100 billion that have been sent. What we don't know is, of course, this figure is much larger But could it be 500 billion in like net, not in profit? I don't know, but we will see. Trump does throw around a lot of figures. He says, I told them that I want the equivalent of 500 billion worth of rare earth, and they've essentially agreed to do that. So at least we don't feel stupid. Otherwise, we're stupid. I said to them, we have to get something. We can't continue to pay this money. So determined to pull some of that funding back. And I think this does tell us a lot about Trump's view of doing what is best for the US alone. We've seen this even with tariffs, on like Australian steel recently, that he's so just internally looking. So we will see. This does then report here in the next paragraph down that Ukraine holds large deposits of critical elements and minerals from lithium to titanium. Remember, the dollar value of things like titanium on the market is a lot less than its strategic value. But what we also know is a lot of the infrastructure to mine this isn't actually that developed. But we need to take into account much of this is in territories that are under Russian control as well. So we will see what exactly happens here. Tatarigami UA, who I say is one of the best reporters on this war, he has spoken about this as well. Based on direct statements from President Trump, Ukraine would be expected to pay back 500 billion in resources. This was not framed as a trade of new weapons for resources, but rather, as Trump put it, we're going to have to get this money and I want it back. Meanwhile, National Security Advisor, of course, Mr. Waltz, has stated that Europe will be fully responsible for Ukraine's security, saying security guarantees are squarely a European issue. Additionally, Pete Hegseth confirmed there will be no US boots on the ground. So again, vastly different to how some are at least turning this to, it's going to be $500 billion of more weapons. But Mr. Tatarigami then goes over the main problems here. And these are some further uncomfortable, unpopular truths. A shortage of infantry is the main problem, and organisational inefficiencies, command control, all of that as well. Now, he says the leading cause of casualties on both sides in 24-25 were drones. Bomb-dropping drones and FPV kamikaze drones, which the US does not supply. Now, I would say in my research on this, I believe this is one of the leading. I still believe the leading is most likely, and being reported in a lot of other areas, still artillery, although I could be incorrect here. I believe the leading cause of Ukrainian casualties on Russians could be, like Russian casualties from Ukrainian weapons, may be drones, but in reverse, we see that overmatch. I think the other way is most likely Russian artillery, but again, I could be wrong. But he says most drones are acquired through donations, direct unit purchases, Ukrainian funds, or foreign loans and investments. There's a lot of European money going to this, but the US does not directly provide for these drones. For the cost of one US applied Switchblade 300, Ukraine could buy approximately 50 to 80 FPV drones, which would be far more effective. We have spoken about this, that just the amount of equipment has a quality of its own. Quantity is its own quality. This is something that's becoming very apparent through this war. For months, our team has received reports of personal transfers from air defense, electronic warfare, anti-tank, artillery, and drone units to infantry roles. Some units have been ordered to transfer 50% of their personnel to infantry. In certain cases, Western supplied equipment is not being fully utilised because trained personnel have been reassigned. In this context, adding more overpriced Abrams tanks or switchblades does little to solve the problem. Again, I speak of these uncomfortable truths. The problem is the shortage of infantry, but I think a lot of people don't want to see to this because it then asks for a lot of accountability rather than putting it onto the world superpower of the US not supplying enough arms. Now, is that a factor? Yes, there are many factors in this, but the key problem at the moment is still that manpower shortage. And there's, of course, a lot of command decisions in here too, and political decisions that are causing problems in this. Yes, Ukraine still needs key systems like HIMARS missiles, artillery, intel data, Starlink, and other critical assets. I think we underestimate how critical intel is from American satellites through to planes, through to AWACS, all of this, and Starlink. If these two went away, especially Starlink, it would be a very different situation at the front line. None of this justifies a $500 billion paycheck, making the proposed deal a terrible one for Ukraine. Without solid security guarantees like NATO or US boots on the ground, the war cannot be stopped. So if this doesn't come with something like NATO, it's not worth it. Again, we don't know if this is $500 billion, if he's just thrown out a number, or it's going to be $500 billion total, and the profits will be significantly less of this, maybe 10 or 20%. I don't know. Paper guarantees from the US hold little value, as the Budapest Memorandum has already shown. If Europe is expected to provide Ukraine security, why should Ukraine make a deal with the US at all? And in my opinion, the amount of systems that Europe can actually give and the amount of intel from satellites, all this, is not enough to backfill what the hole that the US would leave. Why not deal directly with Europe on security and resource instead of involving an overpriced middleman? Right now, there are far more questions than answers, but one thing is clear: Washington has no real plan. The current proposals don't position the US as a strategic counter to Russia. Instead, they suggest Russia will retain occupied territories and get sanctions relief while Ukraine gets pillaged by Trump. So we don't know how this is going to look, but at this point in time, we haven't heard. There's only been murmurs of what Washington's deal may look like. We don't actually know. But of course, you're going to have to get Ukraine to the table. Of course, America's a lot more sway over bringing Ukraine to the table than bringing Russia. But you have to remember that you have to bring both to the table to make it work. It's going to be very, very difficult. So we will see. But the stick is not working, so there's going to have to be a carrot involved. And this is going to be very, very unpopular. Now, away from this is separate, but a US Republican congressman, this Joe Wilson, has brought up about further Lend-Lease acts. And he's going to propose this to Congress. Will introduce Freedom First Lend-Lease Act to give President Trump flexible authorities to send war-winning weapons to our partners, including Ukraine, to deter war criminal Putin, as Biden should have done long ago. Bring Russia to the table through American strength. Again, this is not taking into account, though, the other problems that someone like Tatarami brings up in this. It's not just Abrams tanks if there's not enough infantry. But this, of course, is separate to that $500 billion. And again, this is just getting proposed. Now, with Lend-Lease, historically, these amount of money is forgiven. We know the one that went through in 23, I believe, wasn't ever actually used to my knowledge. Now, let's talk about Tucker, weapons going missing, and cartel, this and that. Now, I'm not going to show the footage here of the interview, the podcast. I'll put that on the Telegram, but this sums it up close enough. This is shared, reshared, I guess, by then the spokesman of Ukraine's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Tucker says, at least words to the effect of, the Ukrainian military is selling American weapon systems on the black market, including to drug cartels. This war is killing the United States, with how Donald Trump can end it. So it's words to that effect that he goes over. Now, the Ukrainian Ministry of Foreign Affairs has said that this is a lie. In reality, every piece of military equipment delivered to Ukraine is tracked. All supplied weapons are monitored by independent mechanisms, and none of the multiple US inspections have ever revealed any misuse. Now, I know as a fact, and you can go through the interviews of people I've spoken to, a lot of weapons go missing. Where do they end up? Well, we don't know. Maybe it's going to another unit. Maybe another unit has paid for them. There's a lot of corruption there. That happens a lot. Look at my interviews. Look at other interviews of people. We know that weapons absolutely goes missing, and not every single piece of equipment is tracked, but nor are there Abrams tanks or HIMARS rolling around in Mexico. Speaking here more on small arms, anti-tank weapons, things like this. Yes, they absolutely go missing, and you're not going to track every M4 on the street when they were being handed out at one point or bought for a few $100s from my experience as well. And we know this with things like this. This happened back in late 22, that there was the infamous Poland grenade incident. The police chief basically fired a bloody anti-armour weapon system in a building. And of course, what we know is, well, then this has crossed out of the country. This has then crossed the border. But what we need to know is, well, what is the extent this is happening, and are they ending up on somewhere like the cartel's hands? A lot of weapons trade or black market like this happens more locally, but of course things can move around. How much of this? Well, what we're going to know is this is going to become obvious very quickly if this is occurring. And to what degree? Well, we don't No, Tucker seems to think that 100% it is happening. He's incredibly confident that this is happening. I know for a fact that this is happening. And of course, with Trump's promised war on the cartels, we will see if this is true or not. But talking of the cartels, there's really two sides to the coin of people talking about this. There's the online, I wouldn't say pro-cartel, but online people that look at war who say the US would get dragged into another endless war with this and would end up withdrawing. And the other side being like your hoorah American go get them would say, well, the US would absolutely obliterate them. And what I'll say is, like a lot of things, both sides can actually be very correct in this. Just like Afghan, just like the Soviets in Afghan, all the Yanks in Afghan, single battles won't be lost. It'll be very costly, but individual battles won't be lost. The problem is how expensive this is going to be and how long this is going to take, because this is, of course, very built up, very dug in, and in very dense environments too, which creates a hell of a lot of problems for more large modern armies. And I go back to money and cost. And this is cost of putting then people's US soldiers' lives in danger as well. And this is what you find with these protracted wars like Afghanistan, both for the Soviets and the Americans, the coalition, or Vietnam, or you can point at a whole nother bunch. As long as you can extend this out and survive long enough, then you will eventually win, even if you don't win a single battle. I can't remember the quote. I wrote it down the other day. I'll put it in here. Henry Kissinger had a quote then about this, that you don't have to win, you just have to not completely lose. If you want me to speak more on that, I will, as sort of my opinion on this. But a lot of weapons going over there. Well, if I was in charge of the Chinese intelligence or the Russian intelligence, what I'd be doing is I would be doing what the CIA did against the Soviets in Afghanistan, and I'd be arming and training whoever is going to be into a large, extended, expensive war, as far as a hybrid warfare behind the scenes. We should also not pretend like the cartels don't have basically endless cash for training or purchasing weapon systems, and a completely international network of moving around incredibly sensitive items as well. And of course, there's a lot of soldiers of fortune who have done a lot of training over there, and a lot of these were left broke and broken after Afghanistan, who were thrown money at as well. So it's not going to be as easy as some say, and it's not going to be this moving through bloody beach party of Texas like some may say, of going the other way. So again, we'll see if you want me to speak on that more. But as far as Tucker, he doesn't provide any evidence here. It's probably more localized, and the degree that is happening, well, we will see. We're going to find out one way or another. And of course, there's American arms sent all over the world to many, many different areas, and a lot of these end up backfiring dramatically as well. We've spoken about the Russians in Afghanistan from 79 to 89. Look at where those weapons ended up then in the future. So sending weapons anywhere is always a risk. I know there's plenty of weapons from the Australian Army have ended up in the hands of bikies before. Legends, have a great day, and I'll speak to you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.